Thanks for joining me for the second episode in my 2-episode series about horror podcasters. In the previous episode, you heard from Stephanie in Books in the Freezer. You heard from Michael Dave Wilson from This Is Horror. And now in this one, look forward to hearing from Neil McRobert, where he talks about Talking Scared, and Max Booth, where they talk about Ghoulish and Dog Ears and some other stuff as well. One quick note that I didn't make in my introduction yesterday, if you are a listener of one of these podcasts already, or you decide to start listening, the things that they need you to do is to give ratings and reviews and downloads. So if you listen to a podcast and you enjoy them, it doesn't take a lot of time for you to drop a quick review and give a rating so that they get kind of sucked into algorithms so that they get put out in front of more people. I've recently gone through to make sure that everybody I'm listening to has gotten a rating from me, because what kind of podcaster would I be if I'm asking for you to do that for me and I haven't done it for other people? So again, give a rating, give a review, subscribe to them, download their stuff. Those are the things that make or break a podcast. These are wonderful folks who work really hard to bring us the entertainment that we get from their podcasts. The least we can do is drop over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening and leave a rating and a review, and make sure that you're subscribed so that when the new episodes come out, they just download automatically. All right, here we go with Neil McRobert.
Hello, I'm Neil McRobert. I'm the host of Talking Scared podcast, which some of you may have heard of or heard, in which I talk, much like Rob, to all the big and emerging names from the world of horror.
And you do it well, I'm going to say. So to get started, we're going to ask a bunch of quick little easy questions just so that anybody who's new to you will kind of understand the basic information about your podcast, and then we're going to dive into some bigger questions. So to get started, when did you start doing Talking Scared?
I was a lockdown cliche. It was September 2020 that I released the first episode, and I made the mistake of doing one a week. I think I've had 6 weeks off in total since September 2020. So, broken man.
That is... Yeah, I did my first podcast that I did, which is on my chest right now. I did weekly for 10 years, and that is a grind, my friend. This is the format of mine now is when I want to. And all right, so weekly, how many episodes have we gotten to?
So at the time of recording, 206, with a few unnumbered extras, which I'll get into in a bit. But yeah, 206 on the main show. Very
cool. This is always a fun one for podcasters. What's your target episode length?
Standard. Well, it began as 45 minutes to an hour. Now I always say it's an hour to an hour 15. Because I do intros and outros, and I get a bit self-indulgent sometimes. I have a real thing about not going over 90 minutes unless it's a real special episode, just because no one needs to hear that much from me, and podcasts bloat. And they lose all kind of editorial rigor, and it's a real problem for people who like the sound of their own voice too much.
As far as like format and how people can reach you, is it audio? Is it video? Is it both? I already know the answer, but I have to ask it like I don't.
Well, I mean, if you're watching this in any kind of video form, you'll see why I only do audio, because I record in this room at the top of my house, which is very nice. I've got a massive window overlooking the English moors. I can see like Wuthering Heights literally that way. But it isn't great for quality crystal vision. So yeah, it's just audio.
Understood. Totally understood. Many years before I had a nice backdrop like this. Okay. And then as far as like listener support and stuff, there's stuff like Patreon, there's bookshop.org affiliate links and stuff like that. So what type of stuff do you have going on?
It's just Patreon so far, but I have a lot of Patreon followers, actually. It's doing pretty well. Talking Scared Pod. Hang on, I forget what it is. Yeah, Talking Scared Pod.
Patreon.com.
That's the one. Jesus, I haven't slept, Rob. Patreon.com/Talking Scared Pod. That's me. I've got like a Discord on there that people genuinely use. I set the Patreon up, and then the Discord kind of came with it. And then a year later, somebody messaged me saying, like, you should come on your Discord. I was like, I didn't know I had a Discord. Went on there, like hundreds of people talking to each other. I was oblivious to it. My wife's always saying I should do the bookshop thing, because I'm quite anti-Amazon. So, and I sell quite a lot of people buy books because of the show, and I hate that I'm giving Jeff Bezos anything. I will set a bookshop link up at some point soon.
Well, I understand that you're working on a project with your website where you're going to have some mention of like every book that's been mentioned on your podcast, which is total insanity. But if that's the case, yeah, linking to bookshop.org affiliate links is probably the way to go. I know Emily Hughes uses it on her website, but it's not hard to set up. So if you ever have questions about it, I can help you with that.
Cool.
Cool. So on the Patreon, are there specific like series of things that you do, or is there just kind of random bonus content? What's the structure of that?
It's a little bit of a mix. So I set off with these great plans of different, because I've got 3 tiers, and I had different plans of this for this person and this for this. And the one thing I do every month is I do this thing called Hushed Tones, in which I review the books that are on the show. Which is the thing I do with great trepidation, because quite a few people who've been on this show have become patrons. And I'm always like, well, I've got to be honest. And I'm so lucky that the 3 people who've been on the show who have become patrons, I genuinely loved their books. But like, if one day someone joins and I didn't like it. Anyway, so I do that. And that's the thing I do, because people listen to the show. I always talk a good talk, because I don't want to in any way take money out of a writer's pocket when they come on my show. You know, who wants to do that? But I also feel an obligation to the listeners who are buying books because of the show to let them know what I really think. So I think it's a good way to do it. So that's the thing that is kind of standard. I do a thing called Whispers, where I ask a number of different guests the same ancillary questions, you know, like, tell me a ghost story. What's the one thing you think you couldn't write? Random stuff. I asked somebody once, who's the one person you'd like to go back in time and punch in the face? Things like that, you know. And then on top of that, so they're the regulars, and on top of that, there's a lot of random, like, sometimes completely exclusive episodes of the show. Sometimes I get previous guests on to talk about a discrete topic. We do listicles. I try and release probably 2 hours of extra content a month on average. And I communicate with people. It's a whole mess of thing. It's fun. It's fun. People seem to like it.
Very good. Outside of the normal podcast feed, any other contents or streams, anything like that you got going on?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you've asked. I've launched this sort of new strand of the show. It sits in the same feed, so you just get it like usual, because who's got the time to set up extra feeds? But I call it Off Book. And all it is kind of the same format, perhaps a bit more relaxed, where I talk to people who are not primarily authors. So far, I have had Phil Nobile Jr., editor of Fangoria. I had the host of the podcast National Parks After Dark, which is all about morbid outdoor experiences. And tomorrow, at the time of recording, Trevor Henderson will be the latest guest on that. And I set that up just because I was increasingly wanting to speak to people from the world of horror who were not writers, but I feel this real obligation to curate a space for writers. I hate saying no to people who come to me and say, can I come on your show? I hate saying no, and I've got to say no a lot. So I really don't want to say no, because I've got a non-writer on the show in their space. So that's why I launched this extra thing. So I've got some exciting irons in fires on that that we can perhaps talk about in a bit. And the other thing I would say to anyone who's interested, I do a lot of writing on horror for like Esquire and Vulture and The Guardian UK. And if you go to my website, which is just talkingscaredpod.com, and click on Meet Your Hosts, there is the cutest ever photo of my dog, and then a whole raft of my like journalism. So for Esquire, for example, I do the yearly best of horror lists. I ranked all 77 Stephen King books. That nearly killed me. Jesus. And I also did this list of like the 50 greatest horror books of all time. So that stuff, people seem to like it as an ancillary kind of thing that I often draw upon that for the show as well. So it's all kind of ties together nicely.
Very cool. I feel like if I were ever to write lists or anything like that, the moment it's out in the world, I'd be like, fuck, I forgot this very obvious one. So
Yeah, every time.
I'm sure you had that feeling. Yeah.
Every time.
And then final of my really quick questions, what is the social media you're most active on? This is one that I thought of because I'm really like an Instagram person, and I know that some people just kind of lean in one direction or another, or just choose not to be on certain platforms.
So I'm really Twitter, but I'm getting better on Instagram. I'm starting to get a lot more traction, a lot more growth. But I struggle to kind of communicate through non-written form. I'm a word person, so yeah. Basically, it's Talk Scared Pod. It's not Talking Scared because some bastard has got that. It's Talk Scared Pod across all social media. But on Twitter, I'm at my most virulent and vituperative, where I'm either talking horror books or calling Trump or Elon Musk names. I set out with this real agenda to not be political, and then as I've got more confident and convinced that people aren't going to desert me like rats off the Titanic, I've just started screaming at the world. So your mileage may differ on that.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think there's a moment where you just can't not say something like January 6th for me, man. Like there was no way I wasn't going to have a voice about that. So
well, I don't know if you've seen the
I
news, but my country is currently on fire.
Yeah.
So I've been tweeting a lot about how much we should all be punching Nazis. But yeah,
which
anyway.
should always be like it's just that should be like the standard. But
never not punch a fascist if you can. But let's not sugar your show with this stuff.
And this is something that I didn't think to ask other people yet, but I'm asking you. So, what was the inspiration for naming the podcast "Talking Scared"?
I'd like to say I had some great game plan, but it's all kind of retrospective. I've never really had a fully formed thought in my life. I just sort of do things in the moment. And like when I said about the Patreon perks, like hushed tones and whispers, I just said them. The actual tagline of the show, that the motto at the end, remember, it's good to be scared. I said that unplanned one day, and I thought, well, that's a good motto. So I was going to call it like some really cringe names, like the Haunted Library, and it makes my skin crawl thinking about it. I thought Talking Scared, and then retrospectively, I like to claim that I picked that name so that people weren't sort of trapped in a cage of horror. Because I have guests on the show, like, for example, Margaret Atwood, who's not really a horror writer, but she writes about fearful things. And I think Talking Scared allows me to approach people who may not want to think of themselves as a horror author or for other reasons. And I can be like, hey, we just talk about, fear and dark and the macabre, or, genre adjacent, which is a phrase I use in every email. So I have a better kind of rationale going backwards than I did at the time.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing for me. When I was deciding to name my podcast, I was talking to I had an idea. I pitched it to my girlfriend. I said, I just want to do pre-publication, talk to authors, get people psyched about the books and stuff. And she's a copywriter. And so like, she's way better at like coming up with concepts and ideas and like using the right words and everything. And she's like, what about the ARC party? And I was like, that's the best thing that's come up so far. So I'm going to go with that. And then like a year after, I got a Facebook memory where I had gotten a bunch of like ARCs that I was excited about, and I posted about it, and I said, it's an ARC party. So like it was already there, but it took her saying it to make it make sense. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of have the same thing going on. All right. So for anybody who's not listened to your podcast, what is the general format?
Well, standard episodes. 95% of my episodes are conversations with writers, and I really do mean conversations, not Q&As. That's, I think, the key. Very similar to yours, man. I mean, I've started listening to yours relatively recently, but I would say your show is the most like mine, or mine is the most like yours, because it's a conversation piece. It's the phrase I use all the time is informed but informal, because I have an academic background, so sometimes I like to kind of elevate things a bit and talk in real kind of detail. Or I'm talking to Stephen Graham Jones, suddenly we both start kind of having a bit of a sword fight with our critical theory and stuff like that. He always wins. but also the times that you don't want to talk at that level. You want to talk about why monsters are scary, or what was the last horror film you saw that scared the shit out of you, stuff like that. So informed but informal. Like I said, tends to be about an hour. I always end on the same pair of questions where I say, recommend a book, because that's invaluable, and what was the last thing that really scared you, because that's often both a good chance for a recommendation and a bit of a closing insight into somebody's brain. And that's it. We will focus on the latest release, but I don't overplan the conversations, and they often go off in quite surprising ways. I just did an episode with Gabino Iglesias where we ended up talking basically about toxic masculinity and the nature of violence, and why sometimes, this is going to sound really bad out of context now, but why sometimes some things that we refer to as toxic masculinity are still valuable in the world in certain contexts. That has a tenuous link to his book, but it's just a conversation between people. So that's the kind of thing, really.
That's a great conversation with Gabino. I was cooking chili while I was listening to that episode.
I feel like that is exactly the right thing to be doing. That or lifting weights in the gym are the things to be doing while listening to Gabino Iglesias talk.
Well, in my case, it was definitely going to be the chili then. All right, so this one might be a little lofty or weird, or may not apply to everybody, but what is the kind of mission of your podcast?
Well, it's a tough question, because I'm very British about these things, right? And it does feel lofty to say I have a mission. So
it can be a selfish mission.
Well, that's the point. That's the point.
Yeah.
It's that kind of. It began as a selfish mission. So it began as right. This is the thing, right? It began as I did a PhD in horror fiction that nearly killed me and has proved utterly useless in my life. 'Cause I was working in a job I loathed as a kind of low-level copywriter. I'd burned out on academia, complete flame out, but I had all this knowledge there was this sense of like I've sacrificed so much for that piece of paper and the knowledge, but I'm not using it. So I thought, well, start a podcast, right? Talk to people. And I got Paul Tremblay as guest one, which kind of kicked it all off. People have heard this origin story a million times, but it began as the mission was I get to use this one thing I know about, and I hopefully get to meet some of the people who have been kind of icons on bookshelves to me, for the last decade. And that's what it was. I remember the excitement of being like, John Langan's willing to talk to me, and, Carmen Maria Machado's going to talk to me. And it was very selfish. And then over the years, a lot of these people have become friends, to some extent, peers, although they're writers and I'm not. So I think that's a slightly difficult term to use, peer, but whatever, anyway. So now my mission, and I don't mean this to be, isn't Neil a good guy? Isn't he out there doing other people? It's a genuine thing. My mission is, one, to do what makes me happy, right? But also to support the community. And I know how cringe and false that sounds. I really do know it sounds like absolute bullshit. But these are my friends on both sides. Listeners are my friends, and the writers are my friends. And if I can bring them together in some way, it's a genuine buzz, right? So I like to. The mission is tripartite mission. Help new and emerging authors find a bigger readership right off the bat, if they can, which I think has actually proved quite useful to some people. Give established authors a chance for a more interesting conversation. So I don't know whether you've noticed this, but mainstream journalism is either really snooty about horror or just ask these reductive basic questions. Why do you write horror? Basically, every question that you get asked if you're a horror writer can be boiled down to what is wrong with you. And I like to spare the Paul Tremblays of the world that question by asking more interesting things. And the third thing is, it's not really a mission. It's more of I get a buzz when either a guest says that they appreciate the close reading, or particularly when a listener says I either introduce them to somebody new, or what I get a lot is that I help them get back into reading. And that's a buzz. I really love that stuff. So, yeah, basically I am I'm a public servant out there doing the good work, and that's my aim.
as I know that you kind of preface it by saying it sounds cringe or anything, but I think that that's the evolution of someone who does this.
Mhm.
So, and I've been talking about books on podcasts for I think 13 years now. You reach a point where, like you said, someone says, I've had authors say, you won't understand how much more sales I've gotten since I was on your podcast, or something like that. Or people saying, I've been around long enough where I can say this author knows and is collaborating with this author because they both talk to me. So when you see that you're not just doing a thing that like exists in a vacuum, and it actually has an impact, and it elevates things and causes good things to happen, like that's kind of like the evolution to like where you're doing something that matters. And so people that recognize that's happening, and then that becomes kind of part of the passion or part of the purpose, is kind of like, I think, the best possible outcome.
Well, and I think when you say about evolution, I think a lot of it is you gain by doing this an understanding of how the publishing world works for genre authors. So when I came in, I knew about publishing in the kind of academic sense, but I had no idea, one, how open and democratized the horror community was. I mean, we all, hashtag horror community and all that, but it is true. Everyone, it's a very just inclusive environment, and everyone feels, if you're not Stephen King or Joe Hill, it kind of feels like everyone else is in the barrel together, helping each other out. And you also realize that even the big names are not selling that many books. So a show like mine to a smaller platformed writer, or a show like yours, or a show like, Books in the Freezer, they're not going to sell 1 million books because of me, but they might sell 10% more books, because you're working with relatively. So you can make when you come into the world, you realize that you can have a bigger footprint than you possibly thought you could, when it all seemed like this huge multi-million platinum disc industry that it's not for most people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for some people, this word of mouth is all they've got as far as like promoting themselves. But the other kind of thing, and then we'll move on to the next question. The other kind of thing that happens is, I think, with kind of the community of horror podcasts and horror influencers and stuff like that, the more someone talks about this author or this person, the more other people in our sphere know about them, and then they want to talk about them. And so even just influencing each other to be more interested in an author, like, it just kind of amplifies.
Oh, yeah, completely, yeah.
So, good. That was the mission question that you were shaking on ended up being a real high thought there.
Yeah, sorry, I talked too much.
No, not at all. All right, so this one's probably a little bit more, hopefully you prepared, maybe you didn't. What are some of your recommended episodes for new listeners? Like, where would be a great place to start?
Oh, I'm so glad you pre-warned me about this, because I would have forgotten the existence of every writer in the world. So I don't want to go on too long, because I could recommend dozens, but to be brief, for a start, I'm always very, very, very proud of my second ever episode with John Langan, because it really does, even now, that conversation encapsulates what this show is about, that informed but informal chat about the whole genre, because Langan is like a professor of this stuff. But I will say with that, I've got quite a bit better, because I'd never done an interview in my life before this show. So that was my second ever interview in any context. So I've got better as an interviewer and on an audio level since those early days. If you start there, you'll enjoy it, but do know that the show improves, I think. Quickly, right, the various many episodes with Josh Malerman are all a joy in equal and different ways, because the man's just a firework. As is anything involving Nat Cassidy, but basically those two are both incredibly inspirational writers and they talk so like movingly and motivationally about writing. And I have a good rapport with both of them. You know what Malerman's like. I don't know if you've spoken to Nat or not, but
yeah, it was immediate chemistry there.
Yeah, just wonderful people, and you walk away from those episodes as the interviewer with this sense of like, I can run through walls here creatively. You just feel like your wings are full. And I hope listeners get some of that too. I've got several episodes with each of them. Go listen. A lot of people found me through Mike Flanagan.
Yeah.
He's a filmmaker, fair enough, but he's our most literary filmmaker by far. So we have this conversation about, film and fiction. We talk a lot about Stephen King, just like he gets what makes a story work. And it's all story in the end, right? So check that out for sure. Margaret Atwood came on. I mean, Margaret Atwood's a titan, and she's incredibly funny, and that's a good episode because she has me on the back foot from the start. And then there's obviously there's the two biggest fan bases, I would say. I've got 2 episodes with Stephen King, episodes 155 and 201. So Stephen King in it. So start there. And if you're a Stephen Graham Jones fan, I've got a trilogy of conversations with him that kind of each one deals with one of the books of the Indian Lake trilogy. He's like this mind-blowingly great guest, and you can hear our rapport build throughout the 3 as we go. So I think now they're all out. I would love people to listen to those back to back if you've read the books. And lastly, sorry, just a side note, because I've mentioned a lot of big note. If you want a little more insight into me as well as the guest, God knows why you would, but episode 109 with Gemma Amor, who is a good friend of mine, but that was our first ever conversation. And I couldn't read her book because it freaked me out so much. So instead of talking about that, we had a conversation about mental health and anxiety in horror. And a lot of people over the years have emailed saying how much they loved it. So if that appeals to you, Gemma's a gem of a person. So yeah, that would be a good alternative place to start.
I would throw in 2 people that you've interviewed. I have not, but I would love to, but I'm intimidated by. But the episodes I thought were great. The conversations, and they're just awesome people. Obviously, Tananarive Due is just like such an impressive person. And Katrina Ward, which... Katrina Ward, if you ask me, is operating in a different fucking stratosphere from everybody else. The things that she does are just unbeatable, but she's such a fascinating person too. Like her just casual stories about ghosts in hotel rooms or whatever. Like there's always something that's unexpected and so fascinating. So yeah, she's a great podcast guest.
Tananarive is incredibly intimidating because she's just one of the most dignified people I've ever spoken to. Like the poise that woman has, you feel like you are like talking to the vice president or something. Like it's and it's funny you mentioned those 2 guests because The Reformatory and Looking Glass Sound were my books 1 and 2 favorites of last year.
Yeah.
So clearly something came through there. Yeah.
They're just so incredible. All right, on to the next one, which for you, this might seem like an obvious thing, but I maybe not. Maybe this will go in a direction I don't expect. But can you name any memorable, unexpected moments in your podcast? It doesn't have to be while recording, but like something that you weren't expected or was really crazy or cool, having to do with you being doing Talking Scared.
So when you're saying you think it's obvious, you're talking about King.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that yeah. The King thing, like I sent I did a deep dive into Stephen King's It with Nat Cassie and Ali Malyanenko, and a few weeks later, I was in London having dinner with some friends, and I just audibly gasped at the table. And they were like, "What?" And King had just done this tweet just saying, like, "I've listened to this podcast. They've done a thinking about it. It's good. You should listen." It's quite funny. He wrote, like, it's bloody blah, blah, he just wrote amusing in parts, as if to say, like, not always amusing. And I just thought, well, I've got to take the punt now, because I'd never thought about writing to him. I'm sure he gets it all the time. And I happened to have like a random email for his agent, and I wrote to his agent. Didn't even know if it was his agent or not. And I thought this may be like, was kicking something to a dark cupboard I may never hear again. 2 hours later, I just got an email back from Stephen King that just said, "You guys rock the house, let's do it." And ever since then, we've kind of maintained a correspondence, and it's the great joy of my getting married, meeting my wife, and having a correspondence with Stephen King to whatever degree are the twin joys of my life. So yeah, that is the great unexpected thing that happened. But there's some other little things, like you mentioned Kat Ward. Like the ghost story she told on the most recent time she came on the show was great. Like it's just launching this chilling ghost story that happened like the night before we had a conversation. And Mike Flanagan made me cry talking about Oi at the Dark Tower on air.
Nice.
And when you first asked this question, my first thought was really obscure, is that when I was talking to Jeff Vandermeer, he had to stop the conversation because a hawk had killed something on his window ledge.
That's so Jeff Vandermeer.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Here's what I'll say about the Stephen King experience. You did two things completely unintentionally by getting Stephen King on your podcast. You gave everybody hope that it's possible to get Stephen King on their podcast, which is the good thing. The bad thing is a lot of people are going to always want Stephen King on their podcast, and he doesn't seem to do a lot. So there's probably a lot of anguish out there because of what you did.
Yeah, I know. And it's a difficult one as well, because I really don't want to, I kind of have sympathy with Richard Chismar.
Yeah.
Which is another episode people should listen to, because I interviewed Richard Chismar, and by God did we bond over like certain things we have in common. That was one of my favorite ever episodes. But he was like, he's actually friends with Steve.
Yeah.
I'm not, but people who are that conduit to King to whatever degree, and do not get me wrong, people, I am not some, gateway to King, but I have, a tenuous link to him now. It's a responsibility, because I can't be giving out Stephen King's email. I never would, but trying to make certain people understand that.
Yep.
I feel like both a baddie and also like, how are you not getting that I can't do this?
Right. Yep. Yeah, it's a tricky situation. Richard Chismar, by the way, the first time I interviewed him was back when the Gwendy books were coming out, and my impression of him is that he still, regardless of everything that he's accomplished in the decades that he's been supporting the horror community, still is just the wide-eyed fanboy. Like he is so just happy to be able to experience this stuff, and like, it's not that he doesn't recognize that he's had a big impact. Like, I'm sure he understands like his station and everything, but my impression of him as a person is he's just so in love with and in awe of the community and stuff. And like, he's been buddies with Stephen King forever, but he's still like jazzed when Stephen King does something or says something. It's a very charming part of his personality.
Well, it's interesting, because that's exactly what we bonded over, or certainly what I loved about. I read it was Chasing the Boogeyman, and that we talked about, and I remember talking to him about how, to an extent that only Stephen King has surpassed, that book and Along December, his short fiction collection, they have this just charming is the word, this charming sepia-toned naivety about a better world when he was young. And that 19-year-old who tried to start Cemetery Dance and all the stuff that came after, it's still in him. He's that childlike, ragged arse, blue jeans, no money in his pocket dreamer.
Yeah.
It's in everything he does. And it just, to someone like me who started this late and is just so thrilled to be at the party, it's so charming. Yeah, I loved him.
Yeah, he's a great fellow. All right, so we could probably continue doing that, but we'll move on to the next question. We'll see how this one goes. Who's on your bucket list now of guests?
It's difficult, right? Because I've spoken to almost all what people would call the big names, right? Yeah. And if there's someone I'm forgetting, please don't be offended. I have not had much coffee today.
Well, now that you're talking to me, it's true.
Indeed, yeah. You know what? I would have said, if you'd asked me this a month ago, this is a bit like maybe not the most, I would have said Neil Gaiman. But by God, that feels like a bullet dodged right now.
Yep.
And yeah, who needs that hassle? And I actually turned down Joyce Carol Oates. She was supposed to come on, and I cancelled the interview because at the time it was when she was tweeting things about like white privilege doesn't exist or white people aren't getting published. And I was like, oh, fuck off. Can I swear on this? Sorry, is that okay?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And I was just like, I'm not entertaining that notion. And I sort of said to a publisher, look, we're going to have to talk about this. And he was like, no, she doesn't want to. I was like, well, I can't have the conversation then because it's just the elephant in the room. And also, mine's is not an interrogative show. I'm not a MSB and MSBC. I don't know what your radio station, your TV stations are. I'm not a journalist in that way.
Right.
But I would like to get her back on now. And sort of now I'm more confident and tackle that. Because, I mean, she is, a doyenne of the macabre. So I would like to navigate those waters now. Joe Hill is probably the next big one.
Yeah.
Maybe when King Sorrow comes out next year, that'll happen. There's people I'm forgetting. I want to go further into more literary. Lauren Groff would be amazing. I love her stuff. Maybe some like literary filmmakers, like Guillermo del Toro has been saying he'll come on for a while, but we can't get it over the line because he's always making Frankenstein. I told you off air that I'm talking to Patton Oswalt's people about getting him on. Maybe it's all maybe, Here's right. It occurred to me the two people. If you could say to me right now, who do you want to speak to? The two people would be Issa Lopez, who made True Detective.
Oh yeah,
because I think, oh my God, Jesus Christ, that show. Yeah. And I'm not the biggest fan, but that show is like so suffused with like the history of horror literature and weird fiction, and Tigers Are Not Afraid is a masterpiece. And I just think like I'd love to talk about her influences and her storytelling technique. And here's the left field one: Bruce Springsteen.
Anyone who follows your social media knows that.
Yeah, I'm a nut, but also I'm a great believer. I did a whole Patreon thing with Nat Cassidy about this. That I believe that Bruce Springsteen is a poet of the blue collar macabre. So I think we have a great chat about horror and crime and violence and all the dark sort of edges of American life. And I've made a bet with Cassidy, with Nat, that I can get Bruce on in the next, I think I said the next 12 months. It almost certainly won't happen, but I like to give myself these little rabbits to chase, So We'll see.
All right, so this is the final question I have prepared, but I reserve the right to do follow-up questions. Do you have any kind of specific goal for growing your podcast? I know back when I did this podcast, I didn't have any goal outside of having a fun conversation with people. I didn't have like a phase 2 or anything, but some people really do have kind of like something that they're reaching for. So where do you fall in that kind of a thing?
It's a difficult one to answer this, right? Because there's a sort of inbuilt humility that comes with being English. And you don't want to reach too far. There's a numbers game and a kind of creative game. Okay, yeah. And the number, and you know this, like you've been in this a lot longer than me. My show is still very small in the broader frame of podcasting, right? So I mean, I'm open about this. In 4 years, I think I'm at 430,000 downloads, which sounds like a massive number. But when you've got 200 and something episodes, it's not that many. You know the reality that is not a big number for a big podcast. They'll do that in a month, Yeah. So, and I have such good guests that I am a little bit baffled. Not in a way that like I deserve more attention, but I'm just a little bit baffled. I'm clearly doing something wrong when I've had King on twice that I haven't got a bigger audience. So, to some extent, I want to grow it in terms of reach because I want to, if I get a new author on, I'd love for like 50,000 people to hear about their book. And, it'd be great. But that's kind of, it's not that important because you're never going to get rich doing this stuff anyway. I'm never going to get rich podcasts about horror books. It's not going to happen. So it's all relative. Kind of arbitrary goals, really. Creatively, I want to just keep being a moving target, but also never stray too far from the core of what I do, which is a weird tightrope to walk. The non-humble thing that I'll say, because I'm speaking mostly to Americans who are open to this kind of thing, is that basically I want to be the guy right? I want to be the guy where when Shudder want to do a documentary about Stephen King or about horror fiction, or when, I don't know, Variety magazine are reaching out for like the years. This happens a little bit with some magazines and stuff, but I want to be the person who they think, consult that guy because he knows. Because I've got the kind of the research chops from my old life and I know people now. So I want to be the guy. That's the cocky mission. But in terms of the actual show, I want it to always be about books because that's the core. And frankly, there are enough people talking about films without me doing it. I don't have the vocabulary. So I want it to be literary in focus, but also to supplement that with a broader review of what story can be, video games, films, music, all the things we've talked about. But to keep it about story and to keep it anchored in books. And I want to keep making the show for as long as I can to make it self-sustaining financially, maybe with ads or whatever, but I will never fucking advertise BetterHelp or any of that nonsense because it annoys me. But I don't want to get boring. So basically, to sum up, I want to keep growing, keep changing while staying the same. And if anyone ever starts thinking this is the same old, then just take me back and shoot me, basically.
Well, I will say that in my experience and my observation, the people who have done the best and had the best trajectory are the people who are enthusiastic and lift up other people as much as possible. So I think that you're on the right path.
Thank you.
I am Max Booth, and I am the host of Too Many Podcasts, some would say. The Ghoulish Podcast, Decayed Tapes, and the Dog Yields Podcast.
All right. So, yeah, this is probably going to be a little bit off format from the other conversations because we will be talking about multiple podcasts. But thankfully, I sent questions ahead of time so you can prepare yourself, and it's not going to be a bunch of fumbling for answers, hopefully. We're going to start with just kind of a list of quick questions for if someone's new to knowing about you having a podcast. I'm going to pause right here and acknowledge for anybody listening. I have a very needy cat in the house. I'm cat sitting. So if you hear a cat in the background, he's not in danger. He's just looking for attention. So forgot what I was saying, but anybody's new to knowing about you and podcasts, I thought it would be nice to have some stats right up front, and then we'll dive into more kind of thoughtful stuff about the podcasts. Yeah. So to get started, when did you start podcasting?
It was in 2017. I launched a podcast called Castle Rock Radio, and that ended around 2020. But I launched the Ghoulish Podcast in June of 2019, and that's still going. Decayed Tapes I launched in October of 2023, and Dog Yields I launched back in April, so not too long ago.
And I forgot about the Stephen King one that ran for a little bit. You guys it was you and your wife, right?
Yeah,
reading Stephen King books and then discussing them?
Yeah, so we would read a book, a short story, a movie adaptation, and then just kind of walk through the plot, like comedically. We did like 115 of those, and then I promptly just said, I'm done. Halfway through a read-along of The Stand, I think we made it to chapter 15, and I was like, I don't like this book. I don't like doing this podcast. I don't like talking about Stephen King. I don't want to do this podcast anymore. I'm done. And I just stopped.
I mean, I can't think of a better reason to stop than that. So,
the podcast made me hate reading Stephen King, which was not the effect I was after, but it sure made me dislike it.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, so far that hasn't happened with me, but I guess I didn't have such a laser focus on one particular author. I think that might be spoiling a bit. You got to come up for air every now and then.
Yeah. And also the thing with that one was we were relying on exploiting comedy out of premises. So I wasn't just reading it to enjoy it, but reading it to find funny elements. And that really just it messes with your brain and it just becomes really exhausting.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I totally know what you mean. All right. And then, so Ghoulish is, so let's talk about the existing podcast. There's Ghoulish.
Yeah.
And what's the general idea of that? You have guests on to talk about, it's like themed, right? Like I listened to one where you had Stephen Graham Jones on to talk about slashers and stuff. So that's kind of the idea, right? You pick kind of a general, they pick a theme and then you have them come on and talk about it.
Yeah, I didn't want to do like say like what Michael David Wilson does, and he walks through like the beginnings and so the whole career. I didn't want to spend
Yeah.
time doing that because it sounds exhausting. I thought it would be more interesting for my show to just pick one specific topic and just focus on that only, something that each guest should know a lot about. So yeah, I mean, obviously Stephen Graham Jones, he knows about slashers, so we did a
Right.
slasher episode, and that's my whole approach with that show is to treat it like a like a late night talk show. I don't love doing a ton of research for lazy reasons, but also I just like riffing, basically just like having a fun conversation that isn't too deep. And I'm also just obsessed with late night talk shows. Like Conan O'Brien is like my dude. I named my dog after him, so
Mhm.
I like that whole vibe.
Yeah.
And also with that
I mean,
podcast, I just upload random things. Like I've uploaded some of my own books as audiobooks for free. I do live episodes of the book fest I run. It's kind of becoming just like a catch-all thing for anything ghoulish related. It's not as
mhm.
focused as it used to be, maybe, and I'm kind of okay with that.
I mean, I'm okay with that.
Well, thanks.
You have my permission, I guess. That's what I'm saying. Permission to do your podcast the way you want to.
Awesome.
Now, dog ears is more. So I believe we talked about this the last time I had podcasting time with you. We talked about abnormal statistics. You were saying you wanted to start another one that was more focused on kind of like either craft or the kind of like behind the scenes of writing, and that's
Yeah.
more what dog ears is, right?
Yeah, exactly that. You should have stopped me when we talked last time. You should have said, Max, don't do that.
I think I did. I remember telling you
We'll see
that
evidence.
this is going to take a ton of research. So if you want help, I can help you. But you seemed pretty confident or arrogant about
Me?
you.
This one is greatly inspired by the recent death of Lit Reaxel, which is
Yeah.
a website we all know that is no longer around. That I spent like almost a decade writing essays for, so now I'm kind of just like revamping them as podcast episodes, essentially. And also, I'll be doing interviews with people once in a while about specific craft things. Like I had my friend Zach Chapman come on to talk about self-publishing comic books because that's what he does. So we went through the whole process of that. So I
Yeah, that
like
was
those
great.
super like niche craft-based conversations, but I don't want every episode to be an interview because I don't know about you, but I greatly dislike the time it takes to schedule interviews. I don't like the process of it whatsoever. I hate reaching out to people. I hate talking about time zones. I hate making sure they have a microphone, which for some reason is often not the case. Well,
Mhm.
even they don't have headphones at all, and that's all really annoying to me. So I don't like doing that. So I do plan on just like writing a bunch of scripts and just reading them, and that is something I'm not used to, but I think I could
Right.
get used to it if I just keep practicing it a bit, because usually I'm used to just riffing with somebody and not having a script.
Right.
But yeah, it'll be craft-based things. I also want to do some like historic deep dives into like, say, how did the dinkus get invented? The dinkus being like
Yeah.
the little three dots that separate a scene in a book, stuff like that. I think would be interesting to do. We'll even like maybe take in some true crime elements and talk about like the crazy author who tracked down that Goodreads review. Just talk about that for a little bit.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I like how you kind of admitted to hating everything about podcasting while we're talking about your podcasts.
I do.
Like, it sounds like if you could just have spontaneous conversations that were recorded perfectly, like that's the ideal. And I think that would be beautiful. Like, so, but I guess, I guess that's not the world we live in right now.
That doesn't even include. I'm sorry. That doesn't even include the 5th failed podcast I began with a friend like a decade ago. Not even like 5 or 6 years ago, called the Taco Summit. Only one episode existed. It was going to be me and my friends just eating tacos in front of a mic and just talking. We quickly realized that was a terrible idea, but that would be the ideal podcast for me.
Well, you run the risk of doing to tacos what you did to reading Stephen King, which no one. Yeah, that's too dangerous. The risk is too high. What was the name of the third podcast you had mentioned?
Decayed Tapes. So
yeah,
Decayed Tapes is one I do with my friend Miguel, and we just watch shot on video Hulu movies and talk about them. And that's pretty much it. I mean, shot on video is exactly what it sounds like. Movies shot on video, so like video violence and things and movies like that were released just on video in the 80s and 90s mostly. Not really book-centric.
Well, then I don't want to hear about it. Because this is all about... Well, that'll go on. You'll have to... I'm sure I'll eventually do a horror... like film focused one of these episodes, and then I'll be like, Max, please talk again. That's the thing. We're like off air for anybody who's listening. I realized that when I want to do a theme episode of anything, Max most likely will qualify to be one of the guests because Max does everything. So
get used to this voice.
Get used to listening to Max. All right, we'll run through some of the quick questions really quick, and then we'll go on to we'll get deep. We'll get more weighty with the questions. So, how many episodes have we got going on with these various podcasts?
Okay, I wrote them down ahead of time. Ghoulish, I have 199 episodes, and I don't know what to do for the 200th episode. Crap. I had a plan. It fell through. Now I'm just like, I don't know what to do. Decayed Tapes, I have 15 episodes in the bag, and Dog Eels is still pretty new. I have 5 episodes uploaded. I have 1 that I need to edit and upload. So 6 officially. So it's pretty new.
I haven't listened to Decayed Tapes, but I've listened to a big pile of Ghoulish episodes, and I think I've listened to all of the Dog Ears. And I will point out for anybody who's a Mallerman fan that the theme music for Dog Ears is a High Strung song.
Yeah, Telescope, my favorite song by them.
Such a cool song. I was like, I'm kind of dumb. I'm not super like observant sometimes. And so I listened to an episode and I'm like, oh, this is a catchy theme song. Good for them. And then I think you mentioned it at the end of the episode, like the first episode or something, like that it was a high strung song. And I was like, oh, I'm such an idiot. How did I not realize that? So there we are. But it's definitely good stuff. All right. I'm jabbering now.
Become how long? Real enemy.
I know, I really am. Editing Rob is gonna be like, this fucking guy just likes to talk. How long do you kind of target your episodes to be, or do you not really focus too much on the length?
I like a good half hour. It's my like target. It's not always what happens, but a good like sitcom length is good with me. Yeah, I don't want anyone to be listening to like 2 hikes. Just give me like a good dishwashing length episode.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
that'll get me through a good 2-mile walk. So I think that's just about right.
Yeah.
I'm at the age now where I have to do things like go and walk, so I don't just die.
Isn't that every age?
Well, no. Well, I'm at the age that I realize that that's the case.
Okay.
I guess.
I guess babies don't have to walk. You don't have to feel like a pediatrician. Like, how many miles is this baby walking a day?
How many steps has this baby got?
He
was born 3 weeks ago. And then you do yours are just audio, right? There's no video element.
No, those video full decayed
Oh, okay.
tapes, which goes on the decayed tapes Patreon only, and I've done a few video ones for Ghoulish. I want to begin doing all of them video. It's just when I made this decision, it was when I stopped being so consistent with uploading things and recording
Yeah.
things. But once I finally begin becoming consistent again, I want to do video as well. Just because that's what people like.
They like it.
When everyone pivoted to video back in like 2016, nothing bad happened to the internet at all. 100 websites didn't shut down because of it.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
And Patreon, Substack, bookshop.org, affiliate links, anything like what type of stuff do you have that's related to your podcast? Or I guess like, because you also have, you have a Patreon for kind of everything lumped together, or what's the story with like how you can get supported?
Yeah, we have 2 Patreons. So for Decay Tapes, we have a separate one because my friend and I split the profits 50-50. But beyond that, it's just one Patreon. I think it's at Ghoulish Books. Might just be at Ghoulish. Now I'm blanking on it, but it's at Ghoulish Books. We release the episodes usually like a week before they go live. Once we have episodes, I don't have a Substack, but I have a Button Down, which is like Substack, but it's not supported by Nazis.
Not supported by Nazis.
Button Down is just the newsletter we do. It's called The Ghoulish Times. I do a weekly issue, and I don't know if I actually mentioned this already in the episode, but I also run a publishing company and a bookshop, so the newsletter is focused on all that. And honestly, all the podcasts I do, like not so secretly, ways to promote the publishing company. So that's why I've never like tried to get advertisers to help with the show. Like to me, the podcast will hopefully entertaining, and B, directing folks to the books we publish.
Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense. On your Patreon, is there anything that's like Patreon exclusive, that's content they can only get there? Or do you do like extras and bonus stuff or anything?
No, I'm not that organized.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
No worries there.
Yeah.
And then what social media is Ghoulish most active on?
Pretty much all of them. Besides, I mean, we're mostly like big on Truth Social. What about you guys?
Oh, yeah. Big on.
Find us at /Ghoulish Books. Truth Social. You shouldn't have invited me on this podcast.
All right, so pretty much everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's on Instagram, Blue Sky, Twiddle, Facebook, Threads. I know there's one that begins with M, but I've never learned what that wheel meant, so I never looked it up. I don't know what it is. But
Mastodon, I think.
Yeah, you can find the handle is usually Ghoulish Books, if not Ghoulish Bookstore. Also, it's on TikTok, which is a thing I don't like saying, but hey, we're on it. We do it all, and nothing's updated well.
I have the problem of I'm really good at updating Instagram, and then as you go to different platforms, you'll notice that I'm just like I update it less and less frequency depending on like what like. So Threads is the least updated. Instagram and Twitter are probably like the top 2. So like I just kind of fumble sometimes because there's so fucking many places to post things.
Well, that's interesting because with mine, anything I post on Instagram is auto posted to Threads by itself. I think you just need to set it up correctly.
Yeah, that's a switch I need to turn on or something.
Yeah.
Man. I just learned something. That's why we have these conversations.
Exactly.
We kind of talked already about the format of the different episodes. So I think that unless there's anything you want to add to what we already covered there.
I don't think so.
Yeah. This is going to be this is like a serious question for other people, but I just can't wait to hear what you say to what is me asking what's the mission? What's your mission for your podcasts?
I mean, I kind of also answered that too. It's mostly to promote the books we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I could also, I don't know, just to do like a they live thing and kind of like subtly brainwash anyone who's listening into like doing crimes would be cool. Any type of crime, not any type of crime. There's some bad crimes I don't want to support, but some crimes I support, like just thieving from companies is pretty cool. I've been big in the shoplifting lately. I don't know about you, but it is such a rush.
There is a movement of I like to think of it as like middle-aged mothers with self checkouts, where if you're not stealing something from the self checkout at like a Target or a grocery store, you're not like a middle-aged mother.
Dude,
Like,
I'm a
you know what I'm
middle-aged
talking about?
mother. I just did this
You're like, yeah,
last
you
week.
just, oh, I did. Yeah, I think I scanned it and I'm going to put it in the bag, like that kind of thing. Like, so the self checkouts is like, yeah.
I won't say the company, but I was they sell like fresh food as well. Like they had chicken, they have like chicken strips and fries, delicious food. I was buying lunch for my wife. I got a big thing of chicken strips, big thing of wedges. I went to the self checkout and I thought, just a spontaneous decision. I'm just gonna pay for these fries. I'm not gonna scan the chicken. And nothing happened. I walked out of that place like fucking Bonnie and Clyde. I felt great.
Yeah.
I recommend thieving.
I feel like the modern shopping experience is turning us all into like master criminals. You know,
Yeah.
like it's just opening it up. But like they keep. This has nothing to do with your podcast. I'm sorry, but like
Not yet.
they keep with the cameras. The cameras now see what's in the cart, and if you don't take it out of the cart, then it calls someone over. So they're trying to keep up with the crime, but all it's doing is like giving us more knowledge of like how they detect the crime. So it's like we're always going to stay ahead of them, I think.
Well, let me tell you, it's not illegal to go into a shop with an umbrella over your head to block cameras. So, well, perhaps a really big hat with a wide brim.
There you go, like a big sun hat. Maybe.
I was thinking nacho hat, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. All right, well, see, this is a real educational conversation in ways maybe people didn't expect.
They expected it.
They expected it. Anyone even knows. All right, so like as far as your like if someone's new to listening to one of your various podcasts, do you have any kind of specific episodes you think that would be good ones to start with for any of the podcasts?
Yeah, I mean, with Decay Tapes and Dog Yields, both of those podcasts are so young. You could just listen to any of them, I think. Maybe not one of the live ones. I would wait to get to those. But with Ghoulish, I mean, I've had Josh on a bunch of times, and he's always great. I loved my episode with Stephen Graham Jones. One of my favorite episodes was with Tade Thompson about clones, and he is such a funny dude, great writer. He wrote the Molly Southbourne books, great trilogy of novellas. My favorite episode is one I probably wouldn't recommend a new listener get into, and that was episode 100, which is basically I recruited every previous guest to like eulogize me because I've been assassinated. Assassination is something that's in the news lately, huh? But so I was assassinated by somebody.
You were more successfully assassinated than some people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you win some, you lose some. And I just had every past guest like come on and just shit talk me essentially. I also paid John Lovitz to do a cameo, basically saying "Rest in peace, Max. You're dead as shit," and it was like the coolest thing I've ever seen. He actually did it, and I had that be at the opening of that podcast episode. But also, I've just isolated that audio to have play at the end of every episode since then. That's a lot of fun. I recommend it. I tried to get him to do something for what I had planned for episode 200, and he denied it. And that kind of like just deflated my enthusiasm for doing the episode, and I just didn't do it.
Wait, John Lovitz assassinated episode 200 is what I'm hearing?
He basically did. Yeah, he I was refunded. They have you pay ahead of time. I got refunded. He just would not do it. It was essentially I was going to go to prison in like the afterlife, and he was going to be the judge. He was going to like sentence me to hell. I don't know why he didn't want to do that. I mean, I thought it was funny.
Money's money, John. Come on.
I mean, I don't see you with any other fucking jobs right now, John Lovitz. Well,
yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. I I was just doing a mental inventory of how much other people I've talked to for this episode have shit talked to John Lovitz.
yeah.
And it was 0 for everybody else so far.
Well, the interesting thing about that is everyone else you've talked to is a coward, spineless, afraid to speak the
Cowards.
truth.
Thinking about past experiences, and this doesn't have to be like something that happened while recording, but like just kind of associated with your podcast. Are there any kind of memorable or unexpected moments or really cool things or kind of weird things that have happened that you can think of?
You know, I knew you were going to ask this question, and I can't come up with anything interesting to talk about.
I think maybe you're the unexpected thing that happens. So, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're the unexpected thing.
Yeah.
Your personality is very kind of like, you know, you make
Maybe
the
so.
events happen. Like, you're the catalyst instead of like the person who's experiencing the thing. Maybe that's what it is.
You know, I do agree with that, and it's something I've like mentally battled with in my head about when I do these podcasts, because like I know like ethically when you interview someone on a podcast, they should be like the center of attention, like they should be about them. But I just can't do that. I just want to make it about myself, and I'm not so much interested in what like they might be promoting or even want to talk about. I just want to like come up with jokes for us to like have fun with. I don't know. I don't know what I'm meant to do in this life, but maybe I don't know. Yeah.
Well, here's what I'll say as someone who's listened to a bunch of your episodes of stuff. There's still like awesome conversation. Like, despite the fact that you think that maybe that your approach conflicts with what a podcast is, an interview is supposed to be or whatever, like your approach creates the opportunity for discussions that probably don't get talked about other places. So
yeah.
There is a value to the fact that you're just like, I'm going to go there. Whereas like someone else might be more rigid and say like, oh, that's something that we're going to cut out.
Yeah. That reminds me, like a lot of the folks I interview, they write books and they're really introverted and they're not high energy, which is okay. But I seem to be the opposite of that. So I think sometimes I come off as a lot, and especially for those who have not listened to previous episodes, and they come on and feel like, what is this? I don't know.
You know, maybe.
What are you gonna do?
Maybe, but like, I think that, I guess back to the point, I think that your energy opens up, and that's actually kind of in the spirit of why I'm doing this, where I'm talking to multiple different horror podcasts, is to emphasize that the thing that I'm doing, and I accidentally became kind of lumped in as a horror podcaster. Like I never tried to identify myself that way.
Yeah.
But like everybody's got their own approach, and everybody's approach is different. It creates a different result, and it creates a different value. But listeners might not know that. So like, what's the best way to kind of understand what the vibe of something is? So that's kind of what the hope for this was. So I fucking love listening to Ghoulish, and I love listening to Dog Ears, and I think that there's so much entertainment, but also useful, good information as well.
Well, thank
like
you.
cracked up your talk with Stephen Graham Jones about slashers was the first time I realized that he was like a savant about slashers, and there were so many things that I didn't understand about slashers until you had that conversation. So yeah, there's like that turned a road for me on my understanding of that, dude.
Well, that's really cool. I just thought of an answer to your question about unexpected things in podcasting. I might be the only podcast that's gotten Jeff Vandermeer to sing Christmas music. Yeah, I
probably.
somehow got him to do that, and he did. And he's for some reason he has somehow become like my Facebook friend. We tag each other on things, and I don't know how that happened. I think he views me as like a strange creature that he's like fascinated by, and I dig it. So that was pretty unexpected.
That's awesome. B,
Yeah.
Jeff Vandermeer is a really, really cool guy. But you're not the first person to mention him among podcasters that I've talked to for this. So
Did they mention that he sung Christmas music though?
no, they didn't. So you
Oh.
got that.
Well,
you have that.
I guess I am unique.
You are. I mean, I was. Anybody who ever had the thought to challenge your uniqueness would just. They need to go put themselves somewhere.
I immediately got defensive.
I know, right? How fucking dare you?
What's the other podcast so I can go leave a 1-star review immediately?
So Neil McRobert said something, I don't remember exactly, but something about when he was talking to Jeff Vandermeer, like while they were talking, an animal killed another animal or something, like a hawk killed an animal in his yard or something like that. So that was pretty cool. So maybe Jeff Vandermeer is just like he's just putting up, good experiences for everybody.
Bad timing to have an animal noise happen.
Kit, buddy, I'm just recording a podcast, man. Yeah, it's a good pod. Yeah.
Slightly off track, but when I was on Talking Skilled, a response I gave to one of his questions basically inspired like a whole novel that I just wrote. So maybe it's him too. I mean, he inspired both books and death.
Oh my god. I can vouch for that. Although I don't know. The only thing that got inspired from my conversation with Neil McRobert was wanting to do a podcast about Justified with him and Stephen Graham Jones.
I demand to be included.
I know, right?
It hasn't already happened.
Justified's
a great show. I never finished the new season though. I'm a fraud. I did like 2 episodes.
I read the book that it's based on before watching the series, so I was kind of more like hooked into the story, I think. So that helped me out. And I also waited till all of the episodes were out and I just watched it in one big run.
Yeah, I was doing it week by week, and I just kind of forgot it was happening. Is that cat alive?
Yeah, he's looking at me like I did something wrong. You knocked the charger out of the thing. It wasn't me.
This is madness.
Sorry about that. I don't have a cat. So anyway. Okay. Moving along. Do you have any specific like bucket list guests? Is there someone that you would like just love to talk to?
I used to campaign publicly online to get Tony Hawk on the show. But he never responded to anything I tweeted at him. I wanted him to come on to do an episode about spooky skate building. And my intention was to act like there was this underground scene of like spooky skate building that he and I both know about. But I wasn't going to let him know that I wanted like to do a joke. I just wanted to continue to insist that this was a thing until the point that he no longer wanted to continue talking. I feel like that would have been great to do, but I also used to fantasize about getting Stephen King on for one specific joke, because I don't think I have like the interview chops to interview him like seriously. Yeah. I don't know what I would even ask him, but I would love to get him on so I could go like, and now my guest, Stephen King, author of such books as, and I would list every single book he's ever written and then go, well, we've run out of time. And just end it.
Oh my god, I love it.
I would still do that if he would want to come on. I just need him to say like, "Hi, Max, thanks for having me." That's all I need him to say. It would be a great episode that everybody would hate, but me.
Yeah, everybody would really hate that.
Yeah,
definitely. That reminds me of I have a tendency to think of people's like lesser works when I like think about a celebrity.
Yeah.
And so like I feel like if I ran into Christian Slater on the street, I'd be like, "You're the guy from Cuffs," or something like that.
Claiming the cube.
Claiming the cube. And so that's kind of my goal in life. If I ever like get myself in the right situation where I'm interacting with a celebrity, just talk about their like least known work.
Don't you the guy who wrote from a Buick 8?
Exactly.
Great book. Great book.
David Duchovny, I did talk to him about Twin Peaks, so I feel like that did come true in a way.
Yeah.
All right, so I think you already answered this final question as well, but we're going to touch on it anyway. Goal for growing your podcast. And I think that for you, like you said, the podcasts are all kind of pointing toward Ghoulish Books, and probably to a lesser degree because it's like regional, the bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
So is that kind of the idea? Like all of the different cogs are moving the machine of the publishing and the bookstore and all that?
Exactly. So I do have an idea for evolving the Ghoulish podcast eventually. And now I do a magazine as well called Ghoulish Tales. And I would love, if I ever will have the budget, I might have to do like a crowdfunding thing sometime to do an audio component of every story in the magazine. So do like hire someone to produce an audio component and have those as each story as one episode on the podcast for free. I think would be pretty cool. But not anytime soon, I don't think, because I have discovered with the publishing company and my fairly brief stint producing audiobooks, incredibly expensive. I wouldn't recommend it whatsoever.
That makes sense. For anybody who doesn't have a good grasp of Max in general, we've talked about a bunch of things that you do, but laying it all out. So there's the physical bookstore that you run.
Yeah.
There is the publishing company that you run. There are the various podcasts that you are a part of. There is your writing career, which is, its own separate thing. There is the book festival that you do every year.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, like having a family, and having a personal life, and there's probably stuff that I missed, but like, that's why I said earlier that you could go on every kind of like theme episode that I make because you literally do everything.
Yeah. I mean, I should say that like my wife collaborates with most of those projects as well. Like I wouldn't know how to do half the things to keep most of these companies afloat, but it's a lot. And it adds on to like the stress of trying to like also do the podcast, which to me always take a back seat when I'm running behind on different things because I just view them as a low priority. Maybe because I've never like managed to grow a big audience with any of them. Like the Stephen King one we used to do immediately had a lot of downloads like right away. And I think that set me up for disappointment once I branched away into doing things not like leeching off the Stephen King name. So I've never been able to grow to that type of download count. And so I've never really like in my head, I'm like, no one's even listening to these podcasts anyway. So if I have to stop for a few weeks or a few months, it's not that big of a deal.
That makes sense. And it's a cost center. Like you're not making any money off the podcast really, unless you're driving people to Patreon. So you got to keep the lights on. You got to keep the green lights on.
Yeah.
For anybody who's audio only, there's green lights going on.
I'm refilling this at my bookshop and I sit in my lobby, which has, I think 5 green light bulbs in total. And once the sun goes down, this room looks like a scene from Creepshow. It's pretty cool.
For anybody who's listening, who's just learning about Max and all of their podcasts, like was mentioned before, there's over 200 episodes of stuff to go back and listen to, like you really can't miss the dog ears one if you're looking for more craft related stuff. the Ghoulish if you want to, there's so many good guests on there. So find a guest that you like, that you're interested in, and start there. And then just kind of pick around, or go from, I don't know, start from episode 1, do what you want to do. But there's a ton of stuff to listen to. And Max does a great job of creating a very entertaining thing to listen to. And unlike a lot of us who tend to not be able to go like shorter than like an hour and a half, they're very digestible episodes too. So that's an awesome thing. But I definitely recommend, I mean, obviously I wouldn't have asked you on to talk to me if I didn't want people to discover and listen to you. But yeah, check out all the podcasts, find the Patreon, support all of the stuff that Max does. And if you know Tony Hawk,
please,
I mean, let's just get this going, because I love that your the things that you that and the Stephen King thing both involve somehow deceiving the celebrity who you need for the situation.
I do love deceiving people. I love to steal and I love to deceive. Those are my 2 hobbies.
And stealing, deceiving, and entertaining. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I'm like a fucking snake oil salesman in the Great Depression.
Exactly.
You might leave
That's how
with
I think
money,
of you.
You might leave deceived, but at least you will say, wow, that was fun.
So to kick this whole thing off, I figured it would make sense if I included myself in the list of podcasts that are being showcased, but I didn't think that it would be too cool if I interviewed myself. So I asked one of my good friends to join me and be the host to ask me the questions about my podcast. And so I'd like to introduce my good friend, Ryan McRae, who is a writer and does book content online and everything as well. And he just seemed like he would be a great choice for someone to kind of rake me over the coals. And so, Ryan, if you don't mind, just, a brief introduction, who you are, what you do, and then you can start asking me questions.
Sounds like a plan, Rob. I'm Ryan McRae. In my day job, I'm a weird sales trainer. And then when the sun sets, I'm just working to be a writer. So, and then Rob and I met we just did the math, almost 10 years ago, because he had a tattoo and I was like, what's that? And then it led to, I do a podcast, and it led to, I was like, well, I read books. And then we had this like one-upmanship about who's read what. And then I said, have you read the latest Chuck Wendig? And he said, oh, you mean the guy I just interviewed? And I was like, well, you win, Rob. You win this round.
What can you just give a quick pitch about like where they can find content from you, and say how to get there, maybe? Because you've recently started a YouTube channel where you're making recommendations for books and stuff too, in a different genre. So I'd like to just kind of like give a peek at that, or maybe your website, whatever you want to do.
Yeah. So I'm a hope to soon to be published fantasy writer, little urban fantasy, and I'm at ryanmcrae.net. Ryan, MCRAE.net. I host a little Substack there where I write about books that I like, just so that people aren't. So I'm kind of the fantasy guy to Rob's horror. And so you can find me there, and then through that you can see my YouTube and my samples of writing, and I'm just trying to build a little micro following. So when I publish something, I'll make tens of dollars from it. So yeah, that's how I do it. And yeah, but no, I appreciate it. And we'll put the link in the notes.
We'll put the link all over the place. One of the things I like about your YouTube channel is and one of the things I like about you and your brain is that you take storytelling and break it down in a way that maybe people didn't think about before, but understanding why a story is told a certain way, or why a story told a certain way is effective is really helpful as a reader. And so when I see you do that stuff, I really love it. And that's something that Stephen Graham Jones does in his books, is break down why a story is effective, or the mechanics of a story. So if anybody's into that nerdy stuff, Ryan's got a handful of videos.
I was a teenage slasher, and it's autographed. Ooh.
Yes.
But and then I just got Small Town Horror by this guy Ronald.
Ronald Melfi, yeah.
That I'm dating. So this is on the spooky thing. But yeah, you and I have talked about how we were just watching the new Aliens movie.
Yep.
And I always tell my friends like what the genre is. I'm like, oh, it's clearly horror because they're trapped. And
yep.
Have you seen the new Aliens movie yet?
Not yet.
Well, spoiler, it's about there's aliens and they're trapped on a ship and the aliens want to kill them. But, we always have the discussion of like, who's the monster? And the monster's never the aliens in Alien in that franchise. It's always the corporation. Like, it's always like, welcome to late stage capitalism. I'll be your host. And my friends are like, that's not what it's about. It's not about late stage capitalism. And then I present to them my TED talk and I'm like, they're like, oh, okay. So, but yeah, so I like breaking it down, or why does an action movie or a book or a thriller or a crime book and stuff like that. Yeah. I like the bones of it. So yeah,
I annoy the shit out of people.
Check me out.
With that kind of thing where I'm like, why? Like watching movies, I'm like, why they're wearing that shirt? Because the costume department was like, this is going to tell people that they're evil or something. Like, there's always something that's So
there's always a signal. Like, what's the signal the author is trying to shoot to the reader and say like, you need to be aware of this. So, yeah.
So for everybody that's been listening so far, if you're into the way that we've been talking about this stuff, RyanMcRae.net and see what he's up to, or if you like the kind of genres he was talking about, like fantasy, dark fantasy,
sure,
Gothic, all the fantasies, go to Ryan's website and check out what he's up to, because Ryan is fantastic.
So I'm happy to be here. I can't wait to hear about your podcast. And so how about we get started?
Sounds good.
When did you get started with this podcast?
All right. This podcast started January of 2023. So it is newer, closing in on 2 years. But I've been a podcaster since the beginning of 2011.
Wow. That has been a minute. So,
it's 13 years.
Gosh. And how many episodes have you done?
So once this one posts and the one that I'm recording later today, this will probably be my 50th episode for the ARC Party. Going back to prior to that, my main running podcast, which I'm wearing the shirt for, booked, hit 540 episodes before we finished that one up. And I've probably done a good 30 or 40 other random stuff aside that. So I'm clocking close to 700 total episodes of podcasts, but ARC Party itself is about to hit 50.
Oh man, that's great. And then what's your target length for that?
That's the trickiest part, because I found that the sweet spot for most people is close to an hour. And that's what I try to do. And that's kind of when I pitch talking to people, I say I'm looking at about an hour, but there's so many times that I hit hour and a half, 2 hours. Unless they have a specific amount of time. If they're like, I've only got an hour to give you, that's a solid 45-minute episode. But if there's no limit, we just keep going. So as much as I'd like to do an hour, it's kind of all over the place.
Okay. And then is your podcast available as audio, video, or both?
It's both. So I record audio and video. I post a normal audio only podcast feed to like every place you could possibly hope to find an audio podcast. But then I also do a video version of it on my YouTube channel.
Do you have a way for listeners to support you? Do you do like Patreon or Substack or Bookshop or any of those ways that people can give you a nickel or a dime here?
I do. So as we'll talk about later with kind of the format of the podcast, I have a bookshop.org affiliate set up. And so when I post links to the books that I talk about or to books from the authors that I'm talking to, I'm posting my affiliate link of those books. And so I get a little bit of money for every sale that those do. So I've got a bookshop.org affiliate set up. So I've got a whole bookshop.org page. And what I'd like to do is for every author that I talk to each episode, I create a specific list of their books. So in the posts, you can find a link to my list for their books, and it's pre-order the one we're talking about, but it's also go buy their back catalog as well. And
That's
I
great.
just introduced a new feature of the podcast that's on my Substack that is paywalled, where it's called the After Party, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into my next one. Like, do you have any additional content beyond the main podcast feed?
Yes. So just recently, I did one so far, and I'm planning on doing whoever wants to do them in the future. A new series called The After Party. And so essentially that's just going to live on my Substack, and you have to be a paid subscriber to it to get to it. But it's spoiler conversation about the book. So I have an author on. We talk about the book in the normal non-spoiler way, and that's the main feed. But then we stick around a little bit, and we have a spoiler conversation, and that's going to live behind that paywall on Substack.
Oh, that's great.
That's pretty much the only extra content that I've got planned right now.
Yeah. And then what like social media are you most active on?
I'd say Instagram, then Twitter. Instagram, I think, is great because it's easy to just see the book, covers and stuff, and it's a little more visually grabbing you and stuff, and it's easier for me there to post like a book announcement or something from someone else's thing to my story. So I'm just kind of quickly amplifying what they do. Secondarily would be Twitter, just because there's just a ton of people on Twitter that's the kind of their main thing. So those two.
Yeah, the book people are still on that platform. So that's kind of why I've stuck around. It is kind of a shit show, but
yeah, but you go where the audience is, I guess. There's really no way around it. Hopefully it evolves. I like Instagram because it's much more visual and kind of positive. It doesn't seem to get like mired down in weird arguments and negative stuff as much.
Yeah. What is the format of your podcast? Like if someone were to say like wanted the recipe, what would that be?
Yeah. So the first thing that you're going to hear in one of my episodes is like usually it's like a 30 to 60 second clip of the author themselves just describing the story, like the plot of the book we're about to talk about. So that's just like setting the stage so that when I dive into conversation, you have kind of a leaping off point of like, oh, he's talking about the book. So 30, 60 second, just quick explanation of the book, like the elevator pitch. And then I dive right into conversation. And for the most part, I try to stick as much to talking about the book as possible. But sometimes it kind of goes a little wider. Like if it's a vampire book, then I might talk about like the rise in vampire books or whatever. But the thing I learned about over the years is that a lot of people just want you to just cut right to it and not do all the fluff. And so I think maybe I overcompensated and there's no fluff at all. And I just do, this is what the book is. And then we talk about it. And that's almost the whole episode. There's really not a lot of other stuff. So yeah, that's the general format. Usually it's just me as an individual host talking with one author. So it's like a one-on-one conversation, but sometimes I'll do themed episodes where either I have an extra person on to talk about a book or we're not talking about a book, but I do horror preview episodes every 6 months where me and Becky Spratford and Emily Hughes get together and we share our, books that we're looking forward to in the next 6 months. But for the most part, it's one-on-one, me and an author talking about their book.
Great. And that stuff is just on the page. It's not how they came up with it or process. It's just.
That's a good question. That really depends on the book. Like there's some books that are so anything could be a real spoiler that I find myself talking more about the phenomenon that it kind of discusses, or, like I have to sometimes get more vague so as to not spoil the plot of the book. Other times it is talking, I'd say the majority of the time it is talking about the characters, the story, the setting, the mechanics of the story, like that type of stuff. Themes that I found in there, like this makes me feel like, it makes me think about this in my family dynamic. And they're like, yes, absolutely. That's what I was talking about. So yeah, you're right. It's much more on the page. It's analyzing the story that type of thing.
Yeah. And then what's your mission with this? What drives you to keep doing it?
So in the time between doing my previous main podcast and doing this podcast, I realized that I was getting all these, advanced copies of books, and I was watching the careers of these people that I've known for a long time and not having a way to contribute or help them. And so when I conceived the ARC Party, the whole idea was I want to read this book before it comes out. I want to sit down with the author and I want to talk about it. And the reason we're having this conversation is to bring awareness to books that are not out yet so that people can pre-order them, or they can go to their library and say, hey, you need to order this book, and build as much momentum to do my part to contribute to the momentum of a book before it releases, because pre-orders and launch are make or break for a book, which means they're make or break for an author, because if your sales are not up to the standards of publishers, your chances of getting another book published are diminished. So the mission for me is I want as many people to know about these books that I find valuable as I can reach, so that the authors get help with people wanting to read them.
Yeah, because the publisher only has so much marketing money to give, and if they're not, if they're not really, I hate to be that guy, but if they're not like the Stephen Kings, it's like it's very Oliver Twist. Like, I want some more, sir, and so they're just like, so yeah, building up that momentum and the pre-orders, and yeah.
But then also, like, it's become also about community. So the reason I'm doing this episode is because there's so much value to word of mouth. And so I'm one mouth. But if I can introduce you to other mouths, this sounds weird or gross, but like the more voices you can explore, maybe I'm okay to listen to from time to time, but like one of the other people that you see on this episode, you start listening to them and you're like, oh man, I love this. Now you found another resource for discovering. And so it started out as like, I want to do my part. And now it's kind of grown to, I want to help everybody do their part too.
Yeah. Because you buy a book and you're like, all right, I'm kind of committed to this. I'm going to put in the time, the focus, the concentration, say no to stuff. And then the book is like, oh, this isn't my thing, or and where this is kind of like you get a good preview of like, okay, that's a book that I'm kind of invested in, and then that word of mouth goes and does that. So
100%.
What would be some recommended episodes for just new listeners? So I know when I bust into a podcast, I'm like, where should I start? Because then there's like inside jokes, or I'm like, what? Like, Welcome to Night Vale, you have to listen all the way back, and then so you're like, there's 7,200 episodes, like, so yeah.
So I got two thoughts on that. First of all, I do, like I had mentioned earlier, my horror preview episodes with Becky Spratford and Emily Hughes. So they're just two horror experts. So if you're coming here and you're like, oh, I'm a really big horror fan, every 6 months we're releasing, here's what we're looking forward to in the next 6 months. So that's just, even if that timeline has expired and we're way past that time, it's still a good resource for discovering books you might not know about, because we'll talk about 30 or 40 books each episode. So those are a great ongoing resource for people who are looking for horror. Otherwise, the format that I have, which is like me and an author, means I would say look through the episodes that I have, find an author that you find interesting, and start there. So I did, I've talked to a lot of like the horror biggies like Paul Tremblay and Stephen Graham Jones and Josh Malerman and I'm looking over on my shelf. So if you see a name that you like, I would say start there. I will do a shout out to a series of episodes I did with Josh Malerman called Interviews Around the House, where I actually drove up to his house in Michigan and spent the weekend there. And there are 4 about hour-long episodes where we just go nuts and talk about a ton of stuff. So if you want like a laid-back conversation, like you feel like you're sitting around chatting with friends, that's kind of an epic 4-hour investment, but that was a lot of fun and it's kind of cool. So either use the preview episodes to find a lot of book recommendations, or find the author that you like and start there, or just listen to that Interviews Around the House, because it's just completely bananas. I don't think anybody's done anything like that before.
Yeah, no, nobody has. And that leads me into my, the thing I'm curious about, like, so you went to Mallerman's house, but like any other memorable, moments in your podcast, doesn't have to happen like in it, but just what's been unexpected that this podcast has brought you besides me as a friend. So,
well, yeah. Yeah, that's why even go beyond that? Like, you know what I'm saying? But I will, so I'm gonna. With Arc Party, I think that it's just the reactions I'm getting from people I've talked to. Like, after I talked to Daniel Krauss about Whalefall, he said it was one of the best interviews he's ever done, and like it was very like vulnerable and stuff. That was really cool. So like when I hear feedback that the thing I did was more than just a conversation to someone, I think that's like kind of like the most rewarding thing. But as far as unexpected, in the time that I've been doing podcasts, I think the murder confession was the biggest one. That was a really freaky thing. There's an author who's no longer with us, and he had spent some time in prison, and I think this will come up in a different conversation, so I won't go too far into it. But he had kind of said some guy messed around with me, and then I finally got my revenge. And I was like, "Do you want me to take that out of the podcast?" And he said no. So that exists somewhere in the booked podcast archives. There is a actual confession to an allusion to a murder. So I'd say that's probably the biggest one. That and David Duchovny reaching out to want to talk to me, I thought was really cool. That was totally unexpected. But being able to talk to like fucking David Duchovny, I would say that still kind of blows my mind.
Yeah.
Not
I remember
murder, David Duchovny, friends with Ryan.
No, yeah. I mean, it's hard to rank those three. Yeah, I remember you sending me that text. That's like a core memory of like David Duchovny wants to talk to me.
No, we were together. We were driving to Texas. I was
you
with
were driving
you
to Texas.
Yeah,
yes,
and I got the email, and we stopped, and we went to a random coffee shop, and I'm freaking out. Yeah, you were with me for that, because then we had to like audiobook his books on the trip.
Yes,
I believe, if I'm right about that. But anyway, I believe you were with me when I got that email, and I was completely flabbergasted. Yeah, we were going to Austin.
Yeah.
Yep.
A million years ago. So like what's besides David Duchovny, like what's a bucket list guest if you were like
That's a tricky one, because I've talked to most of the people that I would have that are alive, that I would hope to be able to talk to. Person I would love to chat with is Megan Abbott, she writes kind of crime thriller stuff, but she is just like top of her game as far as I don't think anybody's writing at her caliber at all. No one can touch what Megan Abbott does. So she's absolutely a bucket list author. And then Katrina Ward, who is a horror author. For anybody who's watching the video, I'm kind of pointing to my little collection of her books right here. She messes with your mind in a way that, again, nobody can touch what she's doing. She's just such a good storyteller, but also at the times I've heard her on podcasts, like is endlessly like entertaining and interesting as well. So those two, and then Tananarive Due, just because Tananarive Due is Tananarive Due, and she's one of the people that I would be terribly intimidated to talk to, but she seems like, again, just one of the top people in horror at the moment. So
she wrote The Reformatory. I have that right. Yeah, that's on my spooky list when spooky season hits. So yeah, I would love to read that. You.
If I could resurrect anybody, I would absolutely talk to Douglas Adams, though.
Oh yeah, which would be necromancy. So
I'm not there yet.
Yeah, he would. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah. What's your goal for growing your podcast? How do you, how are you going to go about it?
So, that's a great question that I'm not going to say that I wrote. So, but I wanted to have everybody always says that's a great question, and I wanted the opportunity to say that. So, really, for me right now, the goal is to just continue to get really good authors and have conversations with them. I would like to get traction with, so the only way money comes in for me is through the bookshop.org thing.
Right.
And so if I can kind of get people into the habit of supporting the podcast through that or through that after party thing with the bonus content, the more money that comes in, the more I can do things that I think would be cool. So I piloted and I didn't really get a lot of success with, but like I like the idea of me when I work with an author to make an episode, having them sign book plates that I can send out to people that pre-order the book. So I've got some ideas of ways that I can be a little bit more interactive with the community and kind of maybe find good perks for them. I just got to get people to understand, like, pre-order through mybookshop.org or through the channels of other folks that I have on this episode. But yeah, that's kind of the thing I want to do right now.
Yeah.
And just keep going.
And just keep going. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for sticking around and listening to my conversations with these wonderful folks. On my post on my Substack, on my website, I have a ton of information for you about these podcasts, where to listen, things like that. And then, as I mentioned before, the more extensive list of other podcasts. I was not able to talk to you for this effort. If you want to support me, the best thing to do is when I talk to an author and I link to their book in my podcast notes, go and pre-order through that link. That's a bookshop.org link, and I get a little bit of money for every sale. That's the only way that money comes into this podcast, so any other expenses I have are coming out of my pocket. So it greatly helps me. It keeps you supporting independent booksellers, and pre-orders are so crucial to the success of a book. So when I talk to an author, I'm encouraging you to pre-order their book to help the success of the launch of their new book, because the more successful the launch of their new book is, the more likely they're going to be able to launch more books in the future. So that's how you can support me. And really, by supporting me, you're supporting the authors that you came to listen to. So it's a win-win. Plus, you get a book, so it's a win-win-win.